Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on regulatory challenges. My name is Louise Noring, and I will be the moderator of the session. I currently work as a regional advisor in NSOE, so that means I deal with all the topics that have to do with RSCs and the future RCCs. And I'm actually seconded by the Danish, so I'm posted by the Danish TSO in Energinet, where I was before. And before, as working in the Danish TSO in Energinet, I actually worked specifically with the Nordic RSC. And working in the Nordic RSC, I had the pleasure of organizing last year's conference in Copenhagen. So I have to say it's really a pleasure to be part of this fourth RSC conference. And it's an honor to moderate this session with such an interesting topic and with the great speakers that we have. So just a small reflection from my side before we start and I introduce some of the speakers. Last year in the RSC conference, we had one regulator as a speaker, namely the Swedish regulator who was on the agenda. And we had several other regulators that joined as participants and that actively engaged throughout the day and asked questions and gave comments. I remember specifically actually Marco, who's on the panel today, who was participating last year in Copenhagen. So after the conference, we asked all the participants for feedback on the conference. Happily, all of this was actually positive. We had one specific remark, which was to put more regulators on the agenda. So I'm very pleased to say that this session is actually, you can say it's planned by popular demand. And from level of participation, which seems, as I understood it from the organizers, to be very high. Indeed, it is popular demand, and I'm very happy to see that. So before we dig into the session and I introduce and welcome the speakers, I also just wanted to give a quick thank you to the organizers, Baltic RSC, for doing such a great job. Vaiko, the organizer, and the entire team have done a great job, especially in conditions with COVID-19 that we all face, and now making this into a virtual event, I think is working very, very well and connecting us all. So thank you very much for that. And then now I would like to introduce the speakers for this session and also shortly explain what will happen in this session. So today we're very fortunate and honored to have first an introduction by Edward James Smith. Edward is the Counselor for Energy in the permanent representation of Denmark to the European Union. And Edward is here today to tell us a little bit about the negotiations towards the clean energy package, as he was part of the negotiations. So to explain to us a bit about how this works and how the electricity regulation is very much a result of compromises, as I believe many regulations are. And then we will continue and have a panel with discussions by Uras Gabriel. Uras is a team leader in Acer. And we will also have Thomas Hülser from the German regulator, the Bundesnetzagentur. And then we have Marco Pasqua di Bisceglie from the Italian regulator ARERA. So very happy to have all of you here today. Thank you very much for that. Then a practical note, as you're all, I believe, aware from the previous sessions, we're doing this online and unfortunately can't have a physical and interaction with the audience that we would have loved to have otherwise. But this is how the world is. But instead, I would like you to ask all your questions online. And I believe most of you know how this works, but just to reiterate, you can find the link on the conference website. It's called Slido, the site. and you use the code hashtag RSC 2020, and then you can go in and type your questions. We will take all the audience questions at the end of the session, and have a full Q&A from this point, and I will do all my best to get as many questions from you guys tackled as possible. But please feel free to go in already now and ask your questions, so we have them ready from when we start the Q&A. And if your question is directed at a specific person, please state that clearly. And also, please do write your name and organization so we know who's asking the question. I think this gives a good dynamic, and we would very much like to know who the audience is and who the people who pose questions are. So please do feel free to go ahead and do that already now. And then I think without further ado, I would like to welcome the first speaker, Edward, to go ahead and share with us a bit about your experiences from the Clean Energy Package negotiations.
Thank you very much, Louisa, and thanks for the invitation to give a short overview of how we managed to end up with the regulation that we actually have. And I apologize for the harsh lighting behind me. It's my work. It's not my house, fortunately enough. But I hope it doesn't distract from the message that I will hopefully be able to convey today. So just to give a short introduction to how we ended up getting the RSCs as they look today. The first mention or the first development of the RSCs came from the guidelines for system operation as part of the network codes. As I'm sure most of you know, here the Commission presented quite a ambitious plan for increasing or cementing cooperation between TSOs, and this was really met it got quite a negative reception in the Electricity Cross-Border Committee, which is where the network codes were negotiated at the time. And there, I think our impression was that the Commission was quite disappointed with the results, and then decided to take this issue of cooperation on system operation further and put it into the Clean Energy Package as part of as the RSCs. They weren't originally called the RSCs, but they ended up being that. So in the revised proposal that the Commission put forward in the electricity market regulation, once again it was Council that was not that enamored with the idea of really forcing TSOs to cooperate on system operation, at least within a structured format, rather preferring the already existing cooperation forums that were there mostly under the under NSOE. But on the other side, the European Parliament was much more open to the idea of having a more controlled approach or a more formalized approach to cooperating on system operation. Just to give you an idea, the real sticking points were at least for the RSCs, it was the reserves, the sharing of reserves, the having to purchase reserves as an RSC rather than TSOs purchasing reserves. And I think this was really very much related to the overriding question of who is responsible for decision making in the end and who's responsible for the security of supply. And most national transmission system operators are responsible for security of supply and couldn't, within the framework of national and European legislation, pass this responsibility on to a third party. There were other issues as well, such as common grid models and a few other points that were quite sticky with the RSCs, but in a large package, as the Clean Energy Package was, an electricity market regulation, this this was together with the cross-border trade, the rules for cross-border trade, and the carbon cap on capacity mechanisms were the three major political issues that were negotiated in the electricity market regulation. And just so that you understand how it really works, how one then gets in the end to a text, which I hear from many people is not necessarily that easy to understand. It's not really clear legislation when it comes to implementing it. This is really a result of the compromise that was required firstly in Council to reach a common position within the Council between the Member States, and then in the negotiations for the final document with the European Parliament. This was really a sticking point. So one moved through the entire document, and in the end one was stuck with these three issues: RSCs, cross-border trade, and carbon cap on capacity mechanisms. And then one does a sort of a barter process, which then ends up, unfortunately, often resulting in unclear text as the compromises are written more in the morning. Maybe people are tired, and issues are sometimes become unclear. Even though the Commission does, of course, clean up the text afterwards, it has to and does remain loyal to the compromises that are reached between the two legislators. So this is, despite the best efforts of the Commission, I believe there still is some lack of clarity or in the intention and the application of the law. But of course, this is often the case when one gets to reaching a compromise on difficult issues that are politically sensitive. So, unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why the language becomes increasingly muddy as the process drags on, and that'll be interesting to hear what the issues are that the people responsible, as those that are listening today to this conference, what the troubles are, the difficulties of implementing the legal text are, and of course this, especially for the Commission, provides important input into what must be looked at when revisiting the electricity market regulation. All laws are revisited every 5 or so years, and the input that comes from these type of discussions is very valuable to improve legislation in the future. So thank you to NCOE for putting this on the agenda in the way that you have done. I think this can really come as a very useful input to the Commission as well as to the Member States who are considering who will consider new legislation when the Commission puts it on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward, for this introduction to how the regulation was developed. For many of us who are working with implementing the regulation, it's interesting to hear what the process was leading to a text, which is, I think many of us agree, as you said, not always fully clear, and it's not always fully easy in that sense to implement. I would just, before we move on to the next section, I would like to just ask a question. You mentioned that the negotiations were tough, and one of the tough points indeed was thinking about RSCs. Could you take us through a little bit in such a negotiation when you really have you've gone through all of the easy points and you're reaching the points with a lot of disagreements? How the atmosphere is in such a negotiation, and how do you actually reach the compromises that end up in the text that finally needs to be approved? So if you could touch a little bit upon that.
Sure. I mean, how the process works is that the Parliament has a position and the Council has a position. They then meet, and first they move through all the less contentious points, the ones that do not necessarily have much political awareness, but are technically important. So then one then moves through those, and usually it goes through quite quickly, as the Commission also provides a lot of valuable input on the how the law should be understood and the impacts it would have on implementation. And as one moves through the text, then one ends up having the one or two or three, or however it may be, political issues which are important both for Council and for the Parliament to be able to get their fingerprint on the text and feel that they've had a successful negotiation. And for these issues, as I said, in the market regulation, it was very much the cross-border trade. It was the capacity mechanisms, especially the carbon cap of 550 grams per kilowatt hour, and then the RSCs, which not all of the RSCs were, but especially the tasks of the RSC was very much a political issue, and I felt that this especially important for the Parliament, as they felt it was a sort of monopoly of the member states to be able to control the implementation of legislation through having their TSOs as national entities and functioning as national entities. So this became really quite an important issue for the Parliament, and for the Council as well, an important issue as of course security of supply is a national responsibility, and it was a lack of willingness or an unwillingness to pass this on to a third party. So basically one had to find a result, and what happens is, of course, is it becomes a bit of a bartering. So then if one can get some in the carbon cap, then one can get something else in the RSCs, and then something else in the cross-border trade. And maybe if you do one thing in the cross-border trade, then you don't allow the RSCs to look at that, then you can somehow get a sort of compromise. And this doesn't necessarily and then the technical advice maybe of the Commission becomes less and less influential in the discussion, and the political objectives of the negotiators becomes more important. And this is especially difficult for the Council's. The Presidency represents the Council, and they have to not only maintain a balance with the parties or the groups in the Parliament, which are all present at these negotiations, they have to, in the back of their minds, also have an idea of where the balance in Council is, because they have to take this back to Council and get it approved by a qualified majority. So it's a very difficult balance or tightrope that especially the Presidency has to walk, and then this results in sort of muddy text, so that everyone can sort of see themselves, at least not feel that they've been run over in these processes, and they go on all night, and maybe everyone is negotiating in their second language, and it really makes it quite difficult. So in the end, often it results in that the intentions of the text are difficult to understand for maybe those who haven't been involved in the negotiation. And then, as I said, the Commission does a lot of work on cleaning this up, but of course we have to remain loyal to the political agreement, and this is then the result, in that it can be very difficult to understand the clear intention of the legislators when implementing legislation. And this is not just the case for energy. This is, I'm sure, the case for most legislative texts where one has had a difficult negotiation. So I hope that answers your question, Louisa.
It does indeed. Thank you very much, Edward, for that. And thank you for the general introduction to how this works, which was very interesting for many of us, as said, who have to implement this this text as a result of both bargaining and compromises. So thank you very much. Now I would like to move on and give the word to Uros and Thomas. Maybe just a quick note that in terms of questions from the audience, then we of course keep Edward with us for the rest of the session. So if you have any questions, any further questions directed to Edward, you're welcome to post them, and we can take them in the Q&A. But then I would like to move on now to Uros and Thomas, who have prepared a presentation on the collaboration between as they are NRAs and ACER, but also with TSOs and other relevant actors such as the Commission, etc. So if Uras, if you can take over.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you very much for having us on this panel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Hölzer. I work for Bundesnetzagentur, and I will give you a very short introduction to the topic of cooperation before Uroš will dive a bit more into details of the cooperation between ACER NRAs and NSOE TSOs, also providing some legal background. Now let's get started with the first slide. Let me start with a statement. Cooperation is a core element of our EU energy regulation. As you are well aware, there are a lot of details for stakeholder involvement, consultations, NRA and TSO interaction and cooperation, in particular on the development, the approval and implementation procedures for the so-called terms, conditions and methodologies, which are measures to implement the regulations. And those rules and provisions are set out in very much detail in all the network codes and guidelines you can see on the right-hand side on the slide. The operational codes and connection codes, the market guidelines like capacity allocation, balancing, forward capacity allocation, the emergency and restoration network code, the system operation guideline, but also the ACER regulation itself and the new clean energy package provides for those rules. Now, who are the main players needing to cooperate in the EU in order to reach our common goals of a secure system and an efficient market? On the left-hand side, there are obviously the implementing developers, the technical guys, namely the transmission system operators, the RSCs and later the RCCs, the NSOE organization, as well as the DSOs with their new EU DSO entity. On the other side, on the right-hand side, you see the bureaucrats, so to speak. So we national regulators cooperating in the organization of ACER, but also with the European Commission, which gives, for example, legal advice or guidance for developing and implementing the network codes and guidelines, as well as the member states, which also have a say and which are organized, for example, in the electricity coordination group. And then we have also the established electricity market operators, and most importantly, the stakeholders and market players, which are involved via public consultations at national, regional, and EU levels. For example, also organized in the European stakeholder committees, which we have established for the several topics. Now, over to Uroš to provide a bit more detail on the legal background and the cooperation.
Okay, thank you. Hello to everyone, also from my side. My name is Uroš Gabriel, I'm with ACER, and will present these slides in cooperation with Thomas. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. So the nice picture Thomas was presenting in the previous slide is based on legislation. So if we focus first on ACER and NRA's cooperation, we have ACER regulation defining a role for ACER in providing a framework at the EU level within which the national regulatory authorities or the NRAs can cooperate in order to ensure efficient decision-making on cross-border issues. In practice, we have set up what proves to be an efficient working structure with different layers. ACER is represented by its director, and the Board of Regulators, or the BOR, plays a key role within the agency by providing opinions, and guidance to the director and addressing the regulatory policy of the agency. The BOR is composed of senior representatives of the NRAs of the 27 member states. And from one level below, the ACER working groups advise the ACER director and the BOR on the regulatory activities in areas of electricity, gas, and REMIT. These working groups form their input or their output on the basis of input of different task forces that are appointed to work in different areas. For example, there are 7 task forces under the electricity working group. Moving on to the legal background for ACER and NRA's cooperation with NSOE and TSOs. We have the electricity regulation specifically requiring both ACER and NSOE to consult each other on different areas such as, for example, network codes development and their amendments. However, to ensure an efficient cooperation on the topics of system operation, we have agreed on a flexible yet a robust cooperation, which takes a form of a system operation coordination group that besides ACER and NSOE includes representatives of NRAs and TSOs from different regions and the Commission as an observer. This coordination group is used to as an informal discussion platform to monitor the developments in the areas of system operation regulation, emergency and restoration, network code, and clean energy package, including on topics concerning the terms and conditions or methodologies, the TCMs related to system operation, also that are to be developed by NSOE and approved by ACER according to the clean energy package. And now back to Thomas, who will explain differences in levels of cooperation for different TCMs.
The implementation of the EU regulations, in particular the network codes and guidelines, requires a different intensity or level of cooperation on the development, approval, and implementation of the terms and conditions and methodologies. This depends on the complexity of the issue at hand, but also on the geographical scope. So one could categorize the types of TCMs and projects into 5 groups, being those projects which require no approval, those where cooperation is and coordination is required at national level. There is a third group where we have border-specific needs to reach agreement, and there at a larger scale we have regional and pan-European TCMs to implement. An example for the first category is from the Network Code of Emergency and Restoration, the network development plans, which you might know are just notified to the national regulatory authorities by the TSOs after they have been fulfilled. They are also notified to ACER, but there is no approval required. Whereas in the second category of national approvals, we have the TSOs, which submit the proposal only to their NRA for national approval. An example would be from the Network Code Emergency Restoration as well, the market suspension rules. In the third category of border-specific arrangements, the concerned TSOs and NRAs of a specific border or set of borders coordinate in order to reach an approval. And an example would be here from the forward capacity allocation guideline, the nomination rules for exchange schedules. On the regional scale, be it the load frequency control block, the capacity calculation region, or the system operation region, or even the synchronous area level, all TSOs and NRAs of this specific region need to coordinate in order to reach approval. And if there can't be an agreement, then it will go to ACER for decision. A good example of such a regional proposal is from the Clean Energy Package, Article 35, the establishment of RCCs in the Central Europe System Operation region, for example. And last but not least, at the pan-European level, all TSOs of the European Union, normally SOE, submits a joint proposal directly to ACER, and ACER decides based on the opinion of the Board of Regulators. An example here would be also from the Clean Energy Package, the determination of system operation regions by ACER. Now, just needless to say that the level of coordination and cooperation increases further to the right, so larger the geographical scope. And also it's important to mention that public consultations may need to take place at different levels, sometimes, for example, at the regional level and additionally at the national level. Now back to Uroš on the cooperation with the RSCs.
Cooperation with RSCs, that is the future RCCs, as we expect them to become, is very important. And again, we have a legal basis in the ACER regulation and a need for cooperation of ACER with the NRAs and ENTSO-E concerning the monitoring of RCCs, that is of their performance and their compliance with the regulation and the TCMs, and for which an efficient data collection will have to be established. In practice, we already today strive to involve RSCs when deciding on terms and conditions or methodologies pertaining their work. Also, we are following the creation of RCCs, of which Thomas will present an example now. So it's back to you, Thomas.
Thanks. Yes, this example illustrates the timeline and the milestones achieved or to be achieved on the cooperation on the Central Europe RCC establishment proposal, which was based on ACER's System Operation Region decision back in April this year. In the months following that, the Central Europe TSOs had drafted the proposal and held monthly webinars with the respective regulatory authorities before they actually submitted their proposal in July to their individual national NRAs, out of which a few had to run a national consultation, as I mentioned before. Now we are in the phase where the CE NRAs coordinate views of all of the NRAs of the region, which is quite a number. The intention is to amend the proposal regarding some aspects, and for that we have regular web conferences, both among the NRAs but also with the TSOs, of course, in order to agree on a common text. And for some issues, we have to involve the Commission and ACER and also across the SORs, so with other SORs. The aim is to approve this jointly amended proposal by mid of January next year. And then the CETSOs have time until July 2020 to establish the RCCs and implement, in particular, the new tasks that the RCCs are facing. While for the NRAs and ACER, it is the task to monitor the implementation. With this example, I will finish our short presentation, and we are now open for questions. So back to Louise.
Thank you very much, Uroš and Thomas, for this presentation. And I'm happy to confirm that indeed from ENTSO-E side also, we very much appreciate the cooperation, the very good cooperation which was presented in these slides. So I would like to, before going into questions, just show one slide about how where about the questions will be. And we can actually already go to the next slide. So this what this slide shows, I think, is very well known to most, that, and has been mentioned before also, that the RSCs, it's the history of the RSCs. They were established as voluntary initiatives and then introduced in the network codes and guidelines. And then introduced in the clean energy package, where we have the steps that was mentioned in the example regarding continental Europe right before. So the RCC establishment proposals prepared and then approved, and then the RCCs will enter into operation. So where we have had today a lot of discussion about the RSCs, the questions coming up now will focus more on the RCCs and the future collaboration and future structures. So I would just, before going into the actual questions, mention one caveat, or for the audience to, of course, understanding of the fact that many of the topics we will touch upon are areas that are under negotiations and may be tough to answer at this point, or it's questions that are very much in the future, so the panelists may not have the full answers. So we try to keep a very open discussion, and but of course may not have the full answers to all aspects. But I think we can then go to the questions, and I would like to start now by asking a question. By asking a question to all of you, but we can start by Marco, since Thomas and Uros made the presentation. So when we look at collaboration going forward, we will have collaboration in different groups and with different actors. What would you mention the 3 words that you think in the future should characterize this collaboration and how you see it, and perhaps if you want, you're welcome to give an example. But starting by 3 words that should characterize good collaboration in the future.
Okay. So yes, thank you. And the situation, from my view, cooperation for sure should be one of the key targets. Dialogue and efficiency. So just to give a brief summary, cooperation, because it's already in place. It has been already in place for a number of years among ACER and RAISE. Cooperation voluntary basis among TSOs in establishing the regional security coordinators. So cooperation should be strengthened in the verge of the clean energy package. So cooperation should be for sure there. Then second issue, I think, is dialogue, because you cannot cooperate without a proper dialogue among the different parties. You have to dialogue, you have to be able to be willing to find a compromise solution, be willing to give up in some cases to some of your interest and needed and needs, and in order to cooperate for the benefit of the overall system. And then efficiency, because the efficiency in the operation of the system, in terms of operation and managing of system security, should be the best solution and the best approach to be managed. And the target should be the final target, because without efficiency we cannot have a proper operational security of the system ensured.
Thank you, Marco, for these 3 good points. And then I would just ask if Thomas or Uros would like to complement, or if you agree with the 3 points mentioned.
I agree with the 3 points mentioned. We should continue the already existing trustful and efficient and close cooperation. We need to have pragmatic and goal-oriented dialogue, and we need to be efficient in achieving our goals and results in order to have a secure system and an efficient market in the end. So nothing to add. I fully support the 3 words mentioned by Marco.
Thank you, Thomas.
I can
yes.
I can only echo what Marco and Thomas said, not to repeat.
Okay. Thank you very much then for that. Then, Thomas, you mentioned being pragmatic and goal oriented. Now, I would ask in the current discussions that you have discussions about the RSC establishment. How do you collaborate between each other within the SOAR NRAs and also with the TSOs? Is it also something that is characterized by being pragmatic and goal oriented? And in general, how have you done the setup of this collaboration?
For sure, it's very pragmatic. So NRA side, we have set up a project coordination team for the Central Europe system operation region in order to find a compromise and to approve the proposal by the TSOs. So this coordination team consists of 3 NRAs from Italy, France, and Germany. And I believe on the TSO side, it's quite similar. So as I mentioned before, we have several regular monthly webinars and telephone conferences, not only among the NRAs of Central Europe, but also with the TSOs. We exchange very pragmatically the documents, we comment them, we discuss them over the phone and in writing. This is how we even collect the views from the particular NRAs, for example, via questionnaires. So it's quite transparent in both directions and very, goal-oriented, I would say.
Here, thank you, Thomas, for that. Now, Uras, on your slides, you showed that the RCC establishment proposals is created CSOs of a system operation region, and they were submitted to NRAs for approval. But you also wrote that the Commission and ACER, you mentioned them as involved. Could you explain a little bit about how this involvement takes place?
Yeah. So at this stage, we are observing the processes which are of establishing of the RCCs, which are now in hands of the NRAs. Before it was with the TSOs to form the proposal. If asked, we are happy to provide early advice when needed via established ACER structures in which NRAs brief us on the developments in regions. This could, let's say, when it's still ongoing, but it's possible, for example, to extend deadlines for the approval or for decision where required. We could also take over the case in case of disagreement among the NRAs or when the time has run out and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Uras, for that explanation. Now, talking about the actors and which actors are involved, we discussed the relationship between ACER, Commission, NRAs, TSOs in relation to RCCs. And of course, I think it's clear to most of us that these are the main actors involved. However, I would like to ask that, interestingly, I think in the electricity regulation, there's mentions of the RCCs doing quote stakeholder involvement, and this could have a lot of meanings, but I would be very interested to hear from you, Marco. What do you see as the main stakeholders for the RCCs in this legal requirement to do stakeholder involvement, and how should the RCCs involve such stakeholders?
Yes. Thanks for the question. It's a very interesting point, because if we look at the story of the RSC and the RCC, it's quite pacific that the NRAs that TSOs are the main stakeholders for the RSC, and that the NRAs are involved in approving the participation of the TSOs to these entities. This is also the picture given by the Clean Energy Package when mentioning that the RCC establishment is a proposal from the TSOs subject to approval by the relevant NRAs of the same system operation region. But now, what are the other stakeholders? Because the Clean Energy Package is clear, Article 41, in mentioning other stakeholders along with the TSOs and NRAs. ACER Commission, as already told you by Huros, for sure, but also market participants, distributors, operators, the DSO entity, ENSO-E. All of these are involved depending on the different tasks that are assigned to RCC. Also, NEMOs are involved. Capacity calculation, for example, is one of the main tasks, and the values for capacity calculation are of utmost importance, not only for the TSOs, but also for the NEMO, of course, for the market participants, for all the people that are going to negotiate cross-border zonal trades across the countries. Operational security is mainly a matter for TSOs and NRAs, but also have an impact on the security of supply. So it's a global importance also for all the member states and for all the entities that are in charge in each member states to ensure the security of supply and to prevent the disconnection of customers from the system. So these are two examples. We can do many other, but we don't have enough time to deal with this. We would require at least 1 or 2 hours only to answer properly to this question. But I think that these two examples shed light on the need of wide perspective for the stakeholders' involvement. So I would like to see our other views on this point, or go on. But these are very. I think that these two examples are more than enough to shed this light.
Thank you very much, Marco. And of course, when you mention other perspective, the other speakers, panelists are of course very welcome to jump in if you have anything to add to any of the points. But other than that, I will move on to the next question. I think, as Marco just explained, there's a wide range of stakeholders. And so that means we have new roles for the RCs. We have new roles in general, actually explained for me of the actors in the Clean Energy Package. We have new tasks for the RCCs, and we have potentially new actors. And what I would be interested to hear from Uras is that in the slides you presented structures such as the SOCG, the System Operations Coordination Group, which I think is a great forum for aligning. But given all of these changes that are taking place, do you think that the existing structures that we have are enough to deal with all of this? Or do we need something new? And here, maybe I would also like to, since it's a session on regulatory challenges, and a regulatory reference, that Article 40 in the regulation talks about regional forums. So do you have any thoughts on new structures and these regional forums that are mentioned?
I believe that the existing Acer NRA structure, which I was mentioning before, and the European Stakeholder Committees suffice for the regulatory aspects. But perhaps I was also mentioning the let's say efficient data collection. So perhaps some coordination could be done on for that. So for this and for other common aspects, the RCCs could perhaps establish a separate fora and report to the, let's say, to the other involved stakeholders in the implementation on the progress for their implementation, and bring problems that they can not solve themselves. They could either report to the coordination group meeting or let's say any other relevant stakeholder, depending of course on the problem. And on the regional forums you're referring to, I think that they matter where the political relevance could prove useful to inform and set pace for the development of the not yet existing RCC's tasks in the long run. Why? As Edward mentioned before, there was political discussions, and political discussions inform sets of pace for the decommunization, which requires the TSOs to make difficult choices and moves towards more regionalization, which is sometimes difficult to achieve without the political push. And that is where the regional forums could become useful.
Thank you very much, Uras. Now I personally would have a long list of questions that I could ask, and as Marco said, I'm sure we could talk for hours on this, but I think we should go to some of the questions from the audience at this point. So the first one is stating that of all RCC tasks that are included in the legislation, which one, in your view, is the most pressing to organize at regional level? So I'm sure this question can be directed to all of you, and maybe just to remind the audience that in the regulation there is a list of 16 tasks for the RCCs. So the question here is, which one of these 16 RCC tasks is the most pressing to organize at the regional level? Are there any volunteers, or could I perhaps start by directing this question to Marco?
Yes, I can try to answer with my view. So I think that there is no one single difficult tasks. There are a number of tasks that are easy to implement, because this, I think, for example, training of staff or check or simple assistance. There are indeed tasks that are very challenging in terms of managing of a huge amount of data sharing. For example, probably we can mention the common grid model that is still under development. And we have tasks that are already done, for example, at N3 level. For example, I think short-term adequacy, so outage coordination. So these tasks are quite easy, quite standard, not easy, probably standard ones. Coordinated security analysis is probably the most complex task for the technical point of view, because of the difficulties, especially in large areas like the core region or the Central European region, to they need to coordinate a huge amount of remedial actions. This is a typical non-linear approach, and so as you know well, when you need to deal with nonlinearities, you have to face IT and algorithm challenges. Then for sure we have new tasks that are still completely new in terms for the coordination, I think reserve sizing, facilitation of current balancing capacity, for which the difficulties may raise not because it's critical, but because it's a new field for cooperation, and also because the relevant methodology haven't been defined yet and will be defined by ENSO-E and subject to ACER approval. So I think this gives a view. So in my view, there is not the main challenging task, but all the tasks have challenges depending on the perimeter of the coordination, depending on the complex of the topic, where some other tasks are effectively easier. For example, training, because you can rely on the existing training structure by all the TSOs.
Thank you, Marco. Then I would like to go to the next question posed by Eric Alström from Nordic RSC. The question is, how can we reduce the risk of formalities in bureaucracy? And how can we reduce the risk that these formalities delay meaningful implementation? And Eric mentions an example such as missing regulatory approval when all TSOs and all agree. So I would like to ask this question to Thomas. How can we reduce? I think because you are the one that named yourself as one of the bureaucrats. So how can we reduce the risk that formalities and bureaucracy delay implementation?
Well, first of all, it is to get early in touch with those who develop the proposal, so the TSOs in the first hand. So it's always the aim of the regulators to coordinate and try to reach agreement on approval for a certain methodology within the legally set deadlines. Sometimes it happens that there are difficult issues to be discussed, or where there's maybe disagreement also with the TSOs, and then we need to ask for amendments or for changes. And this is normally the reason why approvals might be delayed. But in the end, I mean, it's written in the legislation that the regulators play a role there, and there's also this backup in case there is disagreement, for example, among NRAs, and then the methodology has to be approved by the agency. So there is basically a backup in case of delays occurring.
Thank you, Thomas. Now a quick question, because we're ending time. So we touched upon regional forums a bit, but this question has received likes or been voted popular. So there's a question here about RCC shall consult the member states where there's a regional forum. So perhaps what does it mean that RCC shall consult member states? And perhaps Uras, if you have any thoughts on this. For a quick comment, sorry, since we're running out of time.
Thanks for the question. I'm not sure if I'm the proper one to address this, let's say, question. If I have the answer to that, I understand that member states as whole, they have a fora, which is the ECG, which, for example, also ACER has to consult when approving or amending the risk preparedness methodology. So we went to the ECG to consult the member states, collected their answers there, and provided feedback. When there is a regional forum with less member states, I think we first need to see which regional forums exist, and then see how best to, let's say, let's say, to involve, or how the RCCs can involve this regional forum to consult on the matters of political relevance. But I understand that we need to first to decide on which are the political relevant matters. And as I mentioned before, I see those that are not yet fully defined in existing terms and conditions and methodologies, or perhaps some new tasks that RCCs could provide in future.
Okay, thank you. And on that note, with about how the future will look, I think we have to close for today, for this session at least, and return back to the main conference. But I would like to just thank all the panelists very much for your participation, and also thank you to the audience for the great questions. So we discussed today the future, and I think based on your responses and what we have discussed about the good collaboration, and also based on the interest from the audience, and I'm very hopeful for the future and look forward to future collaboration with all. So thank you very much to everyone.